number 15 Clemson 2024 preview on Good Morning College Football. Hello and welcome to episode 65 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a little bit of a different setup, as you might have noticed. We are no longer going live. That's going to allow a little bit more flexibility. Most of the content isn't likely to change, but going to try to make sure that this is uploaded around the same time on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Moving forward, we'll of course let you know if any changes are upcoming or need to be made as we get a little closer to the season, but trying to work out some of the final details because we are just 47 days away from week 0 of the 2024 college football season. So it will be here before you know it. And of course, if you haven't already, check out the newly available 2024 CFF guide from Campus to Canton. Was released on Sunday, July 7th. So check that out if you have not already. For $20, you get full breakdowns of all 134 FBS teams with 200 plus player profiles, projections, defense and special teams information as well. Some of our numbers are in there. The CFB Winning Edge strength of schedule ratings. We do have specific CFF strength of schedule. So take our defensive roster strength numbers, our defensive team performance numbers, and show which teams have the most difficult path or perhaps the more manageable path as far as how those teams stack up. But also there's an early look at our 2024 CFB Winning Edge stat projections. Those will be officially available the middle of next week to all 22 and C2C Winning Edge tier members of CampusToCanton.com. But don't worry, all of the insight analysis, which there's a ton of in-depth information, great write-ups about teams and players, all of that comes from the people who are much better at CFF than me. Jared Palmgren, Nate Marquise, Chris Kay, Justice, Chris Moxley, Ethan Sowers are the ones who are doing, the great work of research and finding the appropriate context, putting the numbers into, give you a reason perhaps why the numbers say a player might be a little bit overrated or underrated, but also, just have a wealth of knowledge of these teams, these players. And it's been really fun to see how this guide has come together behind the scenes. The CFF team at CampusToCanton.com has been working on it for a long time. We've been putting in a ton of hours, a ton of research, and it's been great to watch. And it truly is the best version of the CFF guide that Campus Canton has put out so far, and just gets better and better each year. And the Campus Canton CFF team's done some great work putting that together. Of course, also, if you haven't already, we do appreciate you liking this video, subscribing to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, and of course, joining CampusToCanton.com. If you are so inclined, you can try it out for as little as $2.99 per month. Get access to a wealth of content, rankings on the site from that CFF team, as well as the Devi team, Campus to Canton League rankings, team player rankings as well. Tons of great stuff, Discord access. Again, the best value, we think, in the college fantasy football space, joining for as little as $2.99 per month. But if you want to check out a lot of the other things that we offer, like the NIL roster tool, draft tool, that is now available as well to NIL tier members. And then, of course, things like our returning production database, our team profiles from CFB Winning Edge, that's available as I mentioned, at the All-22 and C2C winning edge tier levels. So with that all out of the way, let's talk a little bit about Clemson in 2024, our Clemson team preview. And as we, get into the numbers, there's not as much maybe variation in expectations for Clemson than some of the teams that we talked about in that 8 to 12 or 14 range in our CFB Winning Edge team strength power ratings. Our numbers see Clemson pretty similarly to a lot of the other, experts and analysts and computer-based analytic systems out there in college football. Most, though, a couple are a little higher, a couple are a little lower. But for the most part, people expect, and the computers, I think, also expect this Clemson team to be right there on the cusp, competing for a spot in the expanded college football playoff. They're a little lower in our ACC power rankings. We discussed, that our numbers are perhaps a little too high on SMU in our most recent preview. But as far as the odds makers go, Clemson right now has a preseason win total, regular season win total, posted at DraftKings of 9.5 wins this season. This morning, also, Clemson's odds to win the national championship were 40-1. That's 14th on the list. Clemson is plus 190 to make it to the college football playoff. So odds makers and the market see the Tigers a little less than 50% likely to make it to the college football playoff this season. And the odds to win the ACC are plus 350, second behind only SMU. So again, the odds makers, the market, see Clemson a little bit higher in the ACC pecking order than we do, but nationally still very much in line as far as those national championship futures go. Others, as far as preseason rankings for Clemson, EA Sports seems to be the highest on everybody. We've only recently started tracking those EA Sports College Football 25 rankings, but there was certainly a lot of noise that came out when EA Sports ranked the Clemson offense number 10 in its preseason numbers. Number 5 defensively made a bit more sense, but at number 6 in the power rankings for the upcoming College Football 25 video game, that's the highest number anyone that I've seen that we track here, throughout this preview series has put on Clemson as far as preseason rankings go. Absolutely, I could see it happen. I mean, this defense could be elite. I think the offense could be improved, but we'll dig into all the details a little bit later on perhaps why, maybe the path is there to be a top 6 type team. But the expectations, understandably, I think a little bit more in the mid-teens, right there on the bubble for the college football playoff. Phil Steele is the highest I've seen as far as his computer poll, his power poll, is number 13 for Clemson. Steele has the Tigers number 12 actually in his preseason predictions, his more traditional how are they going to finish rankings. SP Plus, ESPN's Bill Connolly's best in market or one of the real leaders in this industry for a long time, sees this Clemson team at number 14 in the preseason numbers. The K Ford ratings, Kelly Ford's version 2, also has the Tigers 14th, as does the Sporting News, a little bit more of that traditional how are they going to finish ranking. ESPN's Football Power Index has Clemson at number 15. The Athlon Sports preseason magazine also has the Tigers 15th. ESPN's Mark Schlabach, in his updated throughout the course of the offseason power rankings, post-spring transfer portal window, has Clemson 16th. Beta Rank has Clemson number 16 as well. And then a couple of riders are on the low end as far as their preseason expectations. On threes, Andy Staples, his most recent post-spring power rankings, has Clemson number 18. Stuart Mandel of The Athletic has the Tigers 22nd. So the lowest of this particular group that we like to sort of gauge our numbers against. Who are we higher than? Who are we lower than? A mix of the analytics-based projection systems as well as more the traditional analyst. Bruce Feldman did not, also The Athletic, Bruce Feldman did not include Clemson in his playoff predictions. And we've referenced a lot of mostly quarterback, NFL draft analysts, sort of how they see each of these teams early on, because there are a lot of draft eligible quarterbacks, and it's good to get a gauge on what are the strengths and the weaknesses of that player at the most impactful position on each roster. But not a lot about Cade Klubnik as far as that group goes. He was listed on Jordan Reed of ESPN's quarterbacks to watch, other quarterbacks to watch in 2025, but that Bruce Feldman piece that we've referenced a lot with the anonymous scouts, not really talking about Cade Klubnik right now, at least not in print. But David Hale of ESPN, who of course follows Clemson very closely, very focused on the ACC. He's on the ACC network a lot. His tiers, where he went through and put all 134 FBS programs and quarterback rooms into tiers, slotted Clemson in and Klubnik in at tier 7, labeled that group the curse of 22. So, Drew Allar is another big name, Penn State's quarterback, who we, of course, discussed a bit earlier in this series. But Klubnik is right there in that range. Certainly has the potential to be very good. Could, I think, develop into one of the better quarterbacks in college football in 2024, largely if that wide receiver room is healthier, gets a little more help on the offensive line, which looks really good on paper in our numbers, but did not perform very well last season. If we see some improvements in those areas, I think Klubnik's numbers are going to certainly be better, and think that he'll play a bit better as well. But David Hale, focuses and finds some really interesting numbers in each of his write-ups. And for Klubnik, it was the fact that he ranked number 1 nationally, if I understand this correctly, in the lowest percentage of throws that traveled at least 20 yards downfield in the air among returning quarterbacks in college football. He was at 8.2%, which was just ahead of Allar's 8%. And he digs into a little bit more of perhaps why that is. Mentions that no Power 5 quarterback last year, now Power 4, targeted running backs or tight ends more often. 164 of Cade Klubnik's passes last season were thrown to tight ends and running backs combined. Also, Klubnik, when targeting true freshman Tyler Brown last season, completed 72.2% of his passes, but just 7.4 yards per attempt. Did have 4 touchdowns with 0 interceptions. Also had an 85.5 QB rating. When targeting anyone else, as far as wide receivers or tight ends go, so ignoring the running backs for now, Klubnik completed 62.7% of his passes for 6.6 yards per pass attempt, 13 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions with a 62.2 QBR. So all those numbers across the board significantly lower when targeting someone other than Tyler Brown among wide receivers and tight ends. So Klubnik was not, aggressive or used in an aggressive way. Again, part of that, he was without some of his more talented, potentially dependable wide receivers, had to rely on the surprising true freshman Tyler Brown quite a bit, had to check down quite a bit as well. So we'll see how those numbers change this season, when hopefully has a little more time to throw, has a little more ability to attack downfield, especially if guys like Antonio Williams are back and fully healthy. There's a really exciting true freshman wide receiver class this year that hopefully will be able to come in and take a big step forward. And that rest of the Clemson team, which I think could be really, really good on defense. Really like Phil Mafah at running back. Hope to see some great numbers out of him this year. Taking over as that full-time starter should have a pretty heavy workload compared to where they were splitting that role a bit in years past with Will Shipley. And going through with the exception of a couple of really, really difficult matchups, I think a pretty manageable schedule for Clemson this year. So let's take a look at how last season went for the Tigers. 9-4, of course. I'll share our screen here for our team profiles. If you scroll down in the CFB Winning Edge team profiles to the bottom of that schedule section in the middle of the page, if this is your first time joining us or if you haven't signed up yet at campus2canton.com as a C2C Winning Edge tier member, an all 22 tier member, you can find all this information there. Clemson certainly did not start out well last season. The trip to Duke on, a Monday night, major struggles for this Clemson offense, end up with a pretty ugly looking final score, 28-7. The post-game win expectancy number a little bit better, and we're referencing College Football Data's advanced box score post-game win expectancy numbers there. But 37%, that final score, 3 touchdown difference, usually is indicative of something 5% or worse. But that game was a little bit closer than the final score might indicate. Clemson had a 37% chance of winning that game if you were to run that same box score 100 times, 1,000 times, however many. Clemson might have found a way to win that game about 4 out of 10 times, but get back on the right side of things with huge numbers against Charleston Southern, also very impressive against FAU, but that Florida State loss was, of course, a big one. Had an opportunity to win that game, had a 77% chance, according to collegefootballdata.com, but fell short in overtime. Get 2 impressive wins against Syracuse and Wake Forest before taking a week off, and yet another overtime loss, this time to Miami. So, if you take a look at those post-game win expectancy numbers, 77% against Florida State, 32% against Miami. You think most of the time if a game gets to, or at least I do, a game gets to overtime, at that point, it's basically 50-50. But how do the underlying numbers see how that would shake out? You combine that 77 and 32, that gives you a 110, right? If my, or almost 109, I guess. So you would expect out of those 2 games, Clemson to win 1.09 of those. They end up going 0-2. So a little bit unlucky there to be on the wrong end of both of those overtime games. But the next week against NC State, that was even though a much closer game than that Duke performance, a lower post-game win expectancy number, a little under 1 in 5 chance of winning that game. That one was more deserved, not an unlucky situation. Clemson was outplayed in that game, statistically speaking. So the rest of the regular season, the Tigers were able to get things together and go through a pretty impressive march through Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And then the big, last minute, perhaps win that could give this Clemson squad some momentum heading into 2024. This team had a 3% chance of beating Kentucky in the bowl game, but found a way to get it done. And at the end, you see all those numbers add up to 9.02. So even though there were some games that were winnable that Clemson came up short, the underlying numbers indicate that this team deserved to be 9-4. Think that there's certainly a chance, like I said, to take some momentum into the offseason. This roster, as we'll get into, I think is in a pretty good spot. If some of that luck, turns the other way, which things have a way of evening out from one year to the next more often than not. Perhaps this Clemson team is very much going to be in that playoff picture. But taking a look at some of the stats, some of the most important numbers here, the defense, you can see those bottom columns there in the middle, a lot of top 10 numbers. So even though the scoring against FBS opponents only in the regular season only, that's where that points per game allowed of 22 comes in. All of these numbers, we do our best to make sure that it's only regular season numbers that we use for our team performance against FBS opponents only in the regular season. And then we filter for garbage time when possible. But 22nd in points per game allowed, but much better when you dig into some of the more granular statistics. Number 6 in yards per play allowed, number 5 in points per drive against, that according to Brian Fremeau, bcftoys.com. Number 3 in yards per pass attempt against, number 4 in success rate against, according to collegefootballdata.com, and number 9 in College Football Data's EPA per play on defense equivalent, their PPA numbers. Offensively, of course, a much different story. The scoring numbers are actually, much better than those underlying stats. 66th in points per game offensively, but 102 in yards per play, 85th in points per drive, 122nd in yards per pass attempt. So again, that's where a lot of that sort of dinking and dunking, huge number of passes under 20 yards, a lot of targets to tight ends and running backs. That number is just, a lot of room for improvement. We'll put it that way. Success rate, quite a bit better, top 40 nationally, but 84th in EPA per play offensively, PPA per play. All that equates to, when we look at it on the margins, for a lot of these numbers, Clemson was more of a, top 30, top 40 type team. The overall team performance numbers worked out a little bit better than that. They were 23rd in team performance overall last season, but 81st on the offensive side of the ball, including 103rd in passing team performance, 60th in rushing team performance, but still a top 10 defense. So this Clemson team, through that, strong play on the defensive side of the ball, especially against the pass, where they ranked number 1 in defensive team performance nationally last season, top 15 against the run. But the defense kept this team in a lot of games. And if the offense can take a step forward, that to me is going to be the key for this season. Returning production wise, Clemson ranks 50th nationally, 13th in adjusted offensive returning production. So when you take into account incoming transfers into our returning production numbers, that's what we're referencing there. 92nd on the defensive side of the ball. Of course, Clemson doesn't bring in very many incoming transfers. So those numbers, if we would just look at the raw totals, Clemson does a little bit better offensively, number 11 in returning production. Defensively, top 70 overall, 69th in raw defensive returning production. So just who's coming back, who's not, based on last season. That's what those numbers are when we take into account incoming transfers for most everybody else across the country. That's why Clemson's defensive numbers fall a bit. The quarterback position, though Cade Klubnik struggled at times, coming back is, in my opinion, and certainly from a returning production standpoint, a positive. So a lot of that production, 97% almost of attempts, 96% almost of yards from last season, 19-9 touchdown to interception ratio. But if we can see a few more explosive pass plays, so maybe a few of those short passes going for longer gains, but also trying to attack downfield a bit more for Klubnik, might end up paying off this season. Phil Mafah was the leading rusher last year in 13 games, came up just shy of 1,000 yards, but had 13 touchdowns. If he's not watching Will Shipley take 167 carries or more this season. Of course, Shipley moved on to the NFL. Mafah, I think, is a great candidate for 1,200 yards or so. Similar touchdown number, perhaps. It's going to be, it's difficult to score 13 touchdowns for just about anybody. So hopefully he'll be able to maintain that level of production. I know from a college fantasy football standpoint, expectations are high that Mafah is going to be scoring double-digit touchdowns again on the ground, and that yardage number is going to go up with him expected to get, well over 200, maybe 220, something like that, as far as attempts go. If we look at our statistical projections for this year, we're perhaps a little low on Mafah as far as his rushing attempt projections go. Right now, we've got 37.7%, with the number 2 running back getting over 30%. Maybe that needs to be adjusted a little bit as we get closer to the season. I think Mafah is going to be more in line for 45% or so, get him over to that 200 again yard mark, and 1,100, 1,200 yards, something along those lines. But regardless, the receiving core was perhaps the disappointment last season, certainly statistically speaking. These numbers could certainly improve. Tyler Brown, as we said, David Hale pointed out, he was a bit of a security blanket at times, but the most productive target for Cade Klubnik last year. 68 targets, 52 receptions, 531 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Still very modest numbers, even though led in almost every category. Tight end Jake Brenningstool was actually the top target. So again, from a college fantasy football standpoint, tight end position, Brenningstool would rank among the most productive in the country. Hopefully he'll be able to maintain similar numbers, but Troy Stellato, Adam Randall, if he can get, again, up to that level of what we expected as a high school recruit. He's been dealing with a lot of injuries in his past. Antonio Williams was severely limited last season, held to just 5 games due to injury. But when he is at his best, really can be a true number 1 wide receiver. But as we'll discuss when we get into the 2024 projected depth chart and numbers, those two true freshmen are really, really exciting. But a lot of guys back. Only Bo Collins transferred out. He's at Notre Dame. Will Shipley moving on to the NFL. And then, beyond that, what is it? The top 7 of 9 overall, everybody who was targeted 10 or more times, except for Collins and Shipley, are back. So a lot to work with, even though it wasn't a particularly strong group last season. The offensive line, very experienced, a lot of shuffling in that starting lineup. You can see that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players started multiple games for Clemson on the offensive line last season. Only 2 of those players did not return. Full-time starter Will Putnam, the most important potentially of that group at center. Also Mitchell Mays, 5-game starter, transferred out, but everybody else back. So a lot of experience. Getting Walter Parks back after he was limited to just 2 games will be key as well. But defensively, certainly some very talented players moving on. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Nate Wiggins being chief among those, leaving early for the NFL draft, but Tyler Davis moving on, graduating out of eligibility. The depth at defensive line certainly took a hit with Xavier Thomas, Ruke Ororo, Justin Maskell moving on. The secondary lost some key pieces as well. Andrew Makuba transferring out, Jalen Phillips, Sheridan Jones out of eligibility, Toriano Pride heading to Missouri through the transfer portal. So there's areas where, this team defensively might not stack up quite as well at certain spots right now, because lack of depth is a little bit more of a concern, especially up front and on the back end. But I think enough is coming back that there's reason really to expect this Clemson team is going to be quite solid on the defensive side of the ball. So how do the depth charts stack up? How do our projections look on paper as far as this team this season. Change my screen here. Back to our team profiles, CFB Winning Edge 2024 team profiles. The projected offensive starters, not very many surprises here. Of course, Klubnik back at quarterback, Mafah stepping into that full-time role at running back. Our three projected starting wide receivers right now, Tyler Brown was technically the only returning starter, hitting that 51% threshold as far as being first player on the field last season. But Antonio Williams, like I said, probably the best bet to be that wide receiver number one. Adam Randall certainly has the potential. Still waiting on him to really break through. But those three together, especially Brown being a little bit of an under the radar type player last season, stepping up. If he can play a little more of a complementary role, and Williams blossoming into that real number one target, potentially deep threat, I think that's going to pay off well for both of them. Bring Steele back, again, one of the better receiving tight ends in college football. I'm not sure exactly right now how the center situation is going to work itself out based on, we're still looking for, we'll update these, I should say, once we get a little bit more into the fall with those reports who's practicing at center come fall camp. But took our best guess at putting together the most experienced groups as well as or most experienced players, and then putting Walter Parks back in the mix there from last year's season. 3 full-time starters back. Parks, of course, has been very, very good in the past and 28-game starter as well. The depth here, we only put one true freshman. It might be a little bit of a surprise as to who, especially if you're in CFF supplemental drafts so far this season. TJ Moore has been going ahead of Bryant Wesco. But if you paid attention to, Good Morning College Football, when we were really in depth in our spring practice reports, Bryant Wesco was getting rave reviews basically from practice one at Clemson. So we did slot him in. Still do have Troy Stellato and Cole Turner, who will be back and healthy, hopefully. But don't be surprised if Moore quickly emerges among that group and potentially, play some significant starter type snaps as well. The offensive line, again, we'll see how it shakes out, but silver lining to last season was getting some players a little extra experience, some starting experience, and hopefully that will pay off, because this unit, I mentioned, it struggled a bit last season, ranked 96th in our offensive line performance ratings. So a more consistent unit, a healthier unit should really help this offense as a whole. Defensively, the defensive line on paper was a real strength last season. Did play decently well, but we're used to seeing our defensive line performance ratings for Clemson, certainly top 25, maybe top 10, maybe have a chance to be one of the best in college football. Last season, they were 43rd, but TJ Parker, incredibly productive season last year, double-digit production points added to his individual player rating or video game ratings. Peter Woods, the big name, was part-time starter as a true freshman last season as well. Those two, as sophomores, could develop into two of the better defensive linemen, certainly in the ACC. Potential for even greater than that. Barrett Carter has been an all-conference performer. Wade Woodaz actually more productive last season, but those two make a very, very solid linebacker duo. Have to replace, find new starters at corner, but Avion Terrell basically on the field for half of Clemson's snaps last season. Jaden Lucas was on the field for about a quarter of the snaps as well. He could potentially compete with Terrell and Lewis, and probably going to be on the field when Clemson goes to 5 defensive backs quite often. Most of our depth chart projections include 5 starters in the secondary, but Clemson a little bit different, a little more traditional 4-3 in our projections. But again, we'll adjust these as needed. But both starters at safety return, R.J. Mickens and Khalil Barnes. So overall, Clemson stacks up pretty well. There's plenty of talk, of course, that Clemson has not used the transfer portal to its advantage. That I think is a very fair criticism. Perhaps can limit the ceiling for this team. Not filling some holes as far as inexperience goes, not adding to depth. As we mentioned, that defensive line starters look really good. Secondary, think they're probably going to be okay, but Clemson doesn't have quite the depth, at least on paper, at those two positions in particular, than many of its rivals and top opponents, in part due to not attacking the transfer portal. On the other end of the spectrum, this Clemson team has a lot more continuity roster-wise, consistency, and has gotten players experience in blowout games and last season, some of those injuries, again, silver lining perhaps, some of those players who are stepping into starting roles or expected to contribute at a high level have a little bit more experience maybe than some teams that Clemson will face. And so a little bit of a trade-off there potentially, but when you look at the numbers as far as raw talent goes, and when I reference raw talent, usually I'm talking about average 247 Sports composite ratings, which you can see here on the left-hand part of this grid. Position by position, Clemson recruits as well as any playoff team that you'll see out there for the most part. Top 20 at quarterback, top 30 at running back. Both of those maybe not quite what we're used to seeing at college football playoff national championship contender levels, but top 10 at wide receiver, number 5 tight end, number 3 on the offensive line, number 4 on the defensive line, top 10 at linebacker, top 15 at defensive back. As far as just the talent on hand is, how we gauge that with these recruiting ratings coming out of high school. Clemson is very solid, not really any major weakness on paper. When we adjust for experience and career production, those position strength ratings here on the right-hand side of our image here, those numbers can fall a little bit. Quarterback stays consistent. Running back, even though expectations are high for Mafah, the depth there doesn't stack up super well compared to some others. The wide receiver group goes from top 10 in raw talent to hanging on in the top 50 as far as position strength goes. So that area is certainly more reflective. I think that number, that position strength number, more reflective of that real strength of, or perhaps lack thereof, of the wide receiver group right now on paper. Still top 10 at tight end, still top 3 on the offensive line. So again, the potential is there for that to be a really excellent unit. Hopefully it'll play more to that potential this year. At the defensive line, top 20, a little bit of inexperience compared to seasons past. The linebacker group, top 30, though I think, personally, my expectations a little higher than that. Top 30 in the defensive backfield, the secondary, a little more in line, I think, with expectations. But as always, we'll continue to add production points throughout the course of the season. These numbers certainly could improve, especially if Clemson gets off to a hot start to the season where they will be challenged. This, week 1 matchup at a neutral field with Georgia is going to be very difficult. We've got Clemson as a more than a touchdown underdog in that game. 8.5 points right now in our primary projection model. We have 2 other projection models that we'll get to a little more in depth into during the season, but we have a stats only model where we use our stat projections, and that number will be fully updated when our stat projections are published probably next week. And we also have a talent edge number where we only look at those roster strength numbers don't take into account coaching or on field. That is a number that Clemson stacks up pretty well in as well. But throw all those together, throw everything that we've got, and that's where we have our team strength projections here. So Clemson going to be an underdog, a fairly significant underdog against Georgia in week 1, but should get by a pretty solid Appalachian State team. A lot of folks have App State as the preseason favorite in the Sun Belt. That NC State game is going to be, of course, a big one as far as ACC title hopes go. There are some really smart people out there that I've seen who have NC State, expect the Wolfpack to compete for an ACC title. I think Clemson getting that game at home as the ACC opener, that's a pretty good spot to me for Clemson. That NC State team should have a much improved offense compared to what it did last season, but they're still working in a new quarterback in Grayson McCall, trying to do some things to improve that side of the football, and perhaps might not have all those things ironed out by week 4 in that ACC opener. Clemson getting the extra week to prepare could be beneficial as well. So I kind of like our projection there. I know there are some folks who think that this NC State team could be, a dark horse or a little bit under the radar ACC title contender. I certainly think that they have the potential to do so, but I think that particular matchup works out pretty well for Clemson right now. Stanford the following week should be a pretty easy one for Clemson, especially at home. But Florida State is obviously the big one. We do have the Seminoles favored in Tallahassee, and that's the last time that we've got Clemson as a projected underdog. So if they're able to take care of business, run through this schedule, to expectations, win the games they're supposed to win, beat the teams they're supposed to beat. 10-2, I think, is absolutely a reasonable goal, reasonable expectation for this Clemson squad. The back half of the schedule sets up pretty well. Getting Louisville at home is nice. Back-to-back road games against Virginia Tech and Pitt, not necessarily ideal, but still, would certainly rather that Virginia Tech trip to Blacksburg be the first of those back-to-back games. So that, works out okay. That game could be close to a toss-up at that point. Virginia Tech plays up to expectations this season, but still, 10-2 is definitely a reasonable goal. Our numbers aren't quite there. So when you add up those projected win percentages, much like we talked about with those second-order wins, those post-game win expectancy numbers, looking at 2023, same type deal. So here, against Georgia, we'd expect Clemson to win that game 31% of the time. So give 0.31 wins for that projection, 0.88 against App State, 0.65 against NC State, all the way down, add them up. We've got Clemson projected for 8.28 wins. So our projection is a little more, in line with last season's results, 8-4 in the regular season. That is our traditional projected win total method. We've been doing that for every FBS team since 2021. We've been tracking how those numbers fare against the market. And we've been correct 60.4% of the time. Last season, those numbers were 55.6%. I feel pretty confident in those numbers, feel pretty good about those results, but we're always looking to improve. And so this year we're tracking a secondary win total projection where we give a 10% of a win bonus for every game, every matchup where a team is the projected favorite. We give a 10% penalty for every game when that team is a projected underdog. So Clemson being favored in 10 and underdog in 2 gets a +8. So we would bump that number up to 9.08, still below the 9.5 win total at DraftKings, still below, probably a lot of Clemson fans' expectations for this season. But if Clemson overperforms, takes care of business in those games where we do have them as a projected favorite, 10-2 is probably going to get the Tigers into the playoff. 9-3, That would be a close call. That I think would be put Clemson very much on the bubble. It probably depends on which three, and it depends on how that ACC title race goes. So if Clemson's 9-3, able to sneak into that ACC championship game, perhaps beat Florida State in a rematch, get to 10-3, then Clemson might be looking, well, if they win the ACC, I guess they would be guaranteed a spot, right? My brain's still not there fully with the playoff situation. But then that Clemson team would certainly be in the playoff and potentially be a dangerous team there in the mix. So we, of course, will see how it all shakes out. But that is going to do it for us today. We will be back on Wednesday with another team preview. If you haven't already, please do give this video a like. Please do subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Go out and get that 2024 Campus to Canton CFF guide. Some of the smartest, hardest working folks in the college fantasy football space put a lot of time and effort into that. We chipped in with a few numbers as well, but that is available for $20 for everybody. But also, if you're at certain tiers, an NIL annual membership gets you that guide for free. And then if you want all these numbers for all 134 FBS teams, our projections for win totals, our individual player ratings, coach ratings, team performance, all that's in our team previews. All those returning production numbers are available as well. And those stat projections, which are, you get a little bit of a sneak peek at in the CFF guide, but for all 134 teams are going to be available next week. All of that is available to C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier members of CampusToCanton.com. So thanks so much for joining us today. We will see you again on Wednesday for another team preview on Good Morning College Football.